This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. I am very excited to be talking to a very good friend, one of my favorite comics ever to come through the club. He's out of the Bay Area originally. You've seen him on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. He's one of the stars, writers, and entertainers of the Marijuana Monologues. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Tony Camin. Tony, wow.
A lot of fans.
Yeah, this is a very popular podcast.
Yeah.
El Grande Bandejo, very, very Mr. Big Popular. Hey,
Yeah.
It's so great to reconnect. We had a chance to chat for the Comedy Roundtable, so I have seen you fairly recently, but before that, it had been at least 20, 30 years. So appreciate you making time to do this. Thank you.
I'm doing it for Jill, really. So.
I will tell her that. That'll make her very happy. And she did say to send hugs and love. You are definitely in her top 5 favorite people to work the club. We should talk about it in a minute, but you were really not only great with the audiences, but you had a way with the staff and myself. And I think that's part of why you're so successful. You're a really easygoing, nice guy, and I think that has value when you're out in the nightclub world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's explain to the audience, how did you kind of end up being a comic? What year was it, and how'd you start?
Well, I was at a college radio station, which had actually a lot of listenership because it had like punk rock before that was kind of caught on to commercial stations. And Kevin Kataoka also was there, and he said, "Hey, you're pretty funny. There's this club called the Holy City Zoo, and you can sign up for 5 minutes, and you should give it a try sometime." So eventually, I did. After a while, so Kevin Kataoka was the one who dragged me into this.
Wow. Well, I'm already a big fan of Kevin's, and that just adds on to why I like the guy. That's interesting. And the Holy City Zoo, the audience has heard about many times, was such a crucible for young comics. So many big name and unknown but very funny name comics came out of the zoo. Were you considered a regular?
Oh, yeah, that was my home club because I didn't get to the other 2 big clubs in town were Cobb's and the Punchline. And I didn't work those so much later, like maybe even 2 years, because I just kept it was close. I moved close to the zoo, and you could do the zoo a couple times a week, Right.
And it really, for people that may not have heard previously, the zoo's famous because it had maybe 24 seats. It had a balcony that held like 3 people, and the stage was maybe, 3 feet by 4 feet. I mean, it was really small, and it was incredible.
No, it's bigger than it's smaller than some walk-in closets I've seen in these mansions and stuff. It really was. I think max capacity, it said 60, but I don't think you could fit 60 in there. Maybe it was 40. It was some crazy low number,
Well,
and you had to walk by right in front of the stage to get to most of the seats too. So it was awkward.
Oh, yeah. No, it was not a well set up club. In fact, that's what's incredible about people like you and Paula Poundstone, Robin Williams, Dana Carvey, and go on with people that cut their teeth at the zoo. But the club, despite not being set up, when I designed Laughs Unlimited, low ceiling, brick background, 3 levels in the club. I mean, it was set up for comedy. The zoo,
that old Sack Club, I still to this day, it hasn't been beat for a setup with, like I said, the audience was, the crowd was raked downwards towards the stage at a great angle, like you said, maybe 3 layers, low ceiling, and, it was still new before people knew better. So that's why I got in.
Yeah. It was a great room.
Yeah. You had even the upstairs was nice. You could meet the people from Hat was nice. You can meet it was a great ante area after the show,
Right,
It's a
the
good setup all
Magic
around.
Hat Bar, yeah, it was great. But I only brought it up, and thank you for saying you enjoyed it. I think it was one of the best rooms ever. But compared to the zoo, I mean, like you said, the zoo was like a large
The zoo
walk-in
is,
closet with a stage.
I think the zoo is about as big as the hat, really, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's probably about right. But you got your start there. You spent a couple of years kind of building your set and working on your comedy. Do you remember any of your first jokes?
Yeah, you know, they're just the first sort of jokes you think of at your day job. Like I'll add that to my list as I try to put this 5 minutes together. So I remember some of them being like, "My girlfriend is such a vegetarian; she doesn't even like to meet people." That was an early one.
That's actually kind of a funny play on words.
Yeah. So they were kind of like that level. My name is something about Tony. What Tony Camin? Which Camin is Spanish for king or road or whatever, and then Tony is American for dumb guy who fixes Fiat. You know, just simple joke structure jokes. A lot of self-deprecation. I was a heavy guy. Those are your first jokes. You know, I think it's like some self-deprecation, make a little easy joke.
Well, it is so true that in the early days, and not just you, Tony, but everybody has to find a way to introduce themselves to the audience. That's where the self-deprecation comes in. You're not doing generally genius writing. There's a lot of puns and wordplay, but that is really encapsulates how so many professional entertainers got started. Now, you are a tremendous and very successful, we'll talk about it later on, comedy writer. So I imagine that early on you started to develop those tools and that work ethic to write on a regular basis.
Yeah, I did, but not nearly as enough. Like say, like Arj Barker. That's why he probably got more success. And like I got to a certain level, and then I started getting into writing. I didn't work on my stand-up as much, which I should have done both. But like you get to a new city, you want to do your best. So I would play it safe. Like, oh, I got my good 30 down. And I think, obviously now everybody's trying to write so much because there's people put out albums and you want more material, and that's the way to go. So I think I was good at. I did have a work ethic. I try to write a couple hours a day, but I could have had a better one. Like even.
Well,
I think
you're mentioning, you're mentioning to the audience Arj Barker, who's a very funny guy, and he found huge success in Australia, which ended up translating back to the U.S. But he's like the Johnny Carson almost of Australia, and gets recognized everywhere. But that work ethic that you developed early on in writing, even though you kind of switched over to straight comedy writing, you still had to develop that skill, that creativeness to be able to sit down and write funny stuff. I mean, that's not something everybody can do.
No, and you go through. I think you go through stages. Like when you're in the Bay Area, you write stuff. You're like, first you want to get laughed at whatever you can get. You just want to get that fear of not getting laughed out of the way. And then you get a little more picky. Well, I want this kind of laugh. I don't want to get these cheap laughs anymore or whatever. I want this. I want to get, your writing gets more sophisticated, gets more personal. Then I found when you go on the road, oh, people in Texas don't care that much about my San Francisco style. So then you realize, oh, I'm kind of writing for this niche. I'm not really writing universally. And they're both good. You just have to realize what audience you're playing for. So I think there's a lot of, you're always learning, like, you're just never like, oh, I'm done learning about writing,
Oh, yeah. It's one of those art forms that just continues to grow and develop. And it's funny that you mentioned the difficulty of being a San Francisco type or style act and then going out in the world. We've had it come up in a couple other interviews. I've heard from other comics that they could be rocking it as a headliner in the Bay Area, and they go down to LA or they go to Boston or something where they have a whole different kind of take on comedy. And it's a huge adjustment. In fact, many of them complained kind of that they had to kind of start over.
Yeah, it's certainly different everywhere. You're like, I remember my first time in Texas, in Houston, it was San Antonio, before I Please welcome Tony from San Francisco, Tony Camin. I had like a Buddy Holly glasses and like a suit coat on, a blazer. Before I even got to the mic, I heard someone yell "faggot" before I even did my first joke. You know, so it's like you're like, okay, I gotta, whatever, I gotta hit this a little harder and even either express my personality stronger and bowl over these people, or I gotta make some adjust. This is gonna be a different thing.
Right. You got to find your voice and in how you're going to combine your own take on comedy, what you've learned getting a start in comedy. But as you mentioned a few minutes ago, you also have to kind of be able to relate to any audience anytime. A Friday night late show in New York is different than a Wednesday, small show in Minneapolis or something.
Yeah, but I think that's there's a certain type of comic now that doesn't want I don't think Bill Burr or David Tell cares to relate to the audience at all. They just have great jokes and they're so powerful the audience comes to them. I think that's a newer thing. I don't think like Harlan, I don't think he was bending. I think they were the audience that if you get to a certain level, they bend towards you. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
No, it does. If you're a name act and they're there to see you, you
have to earn that.
You have to
earn that. You have to earn that status. But I know some comics just dig in harder with their personalities, and it pays off for them if they're skilled and they put the work in. Other comics, I probably tended to do this. I just played it safer some places, and until I got back home and wrote differently. I just won't do that joke here. I'll write more stuff for this market. Well, I didn't really dig in to my personality. I just tried to, do a good job that week.
Yeah, and you're right about people that some just power through with their personality. I'm thinking of Sam Kinison and Bobby Slayton and a few of those guys that kind of...
Yeah, they're not going to... Bobby Slayton's not going to change up his act for someone in a San Francisco PC place versus someone in Dallas. He's going to do the same great act. But, both. He's going to kill both places because they know Bobby. They know what they're getting.
Right. But
by now.
But I'm agreeing with you that most comics don't have that luxury. I think that you have to, as you said, start writing to the moment as opposed to leaning on your early San Francisco stuff. You have to grow and develop. But I think that's all part of the process. Well, you did it very well and ended up being very successful. You've played clubs and in events all over the country. How did you end up working at Laughs Unlimited?
You came down to the San Francisco Improv, they had a Monday night showcase. Mondays were the hot night in San Francisco, where Cobb's and the SF Improv at the time had a Monday night showcase. And you came and you said, "Hey, I have this club." You gave me your number, your card, and then even before I got hired, I did your contest and I came in second, I think.
Oh, the Great Northern California Comedy Competition.
Yeah, I did that. I came in second or third. So, and by then you saw me once and said, "Hey, I like, so I think between that, and he just booked me to, and it was great because, you had the 2 rooms at the time. This is after Birdcage. It was just citrus and Old Sack, but, and it was fun. And that's when I started working with these guys. It was my first time out of San Francisco. We still had great audiences and started working with guys from the road that maybe didn't come to San Francisco, and they were great, like Peter Galki, guys like that, so many great guys.
You got exposed to different styles of comedy from different parts of the country by getting out of the city. I did not know I was your first out-of-town gig, but it just goes to show why I remember enjoying your company and your comedy so well, because if I came and saw you at a showcase and pulled you aside and invited you up, that's... way more personal than getting some VHS tape in the mail.
Yeah. And I don't know if people even watch those things.
I used to have other people watch them and then tell me what to watch. I'd get so many, I give one.
You had a screener. You had so many screeners.
Well, you worked at Laughs quite a bit. As I said, you were very popular with the audiences and the staff. Do you have any memories, good or bad, of Laughs?
Oh yeah, I mean, I probably worked there for probably about 20 years, or from whatever. If I don't know 20, but it just seemed because sometimes you work there 4 times a year, 4 weeks a year, which is a lot for. So I had Chris Hobbs was my roommate, and he was already a regular with you, or he was already working for you. And I met Jim Farrell through Chris and all these guys. You already knew all these guys, and it was just a fun 2 weeks. You had 2 weeks of good work, and you always worked with great, friendly people. Like mostly, I never had to work with John Fox, so I don't know. I never had to taste the mayonnaise after a John Fox week.
There's a little inside story.
Yeah.
There's certain people that were more difficult to work with, and Fox being a road warrior that had a whole different take on life. But in general, you got to work with good people. If you mentioned Peter Galke.
Oh yeah, and I played. I had some, and even who was Jeff Schimmel was so funny. You didn't have tons of dirty guys, but Jeff Schimmel, I had a fun week with Jeff Schimmel. Not Jeff Schimmel, Robert Schimmel. Sorry, that's his brother, a writer.
Yeah, but I think that it's nice. I think you're one of the first comics I've interviewed that pointed out the value of interacting with comics from other parts of the country. In my book that just came out, I mentioned that it's important to watch other people's acts because you learn from watching others. It's like anything. It's so much easier to garner some information or ideas while watching other comics. I'm not talking about.
Oh, and it's the best way to steal jokes is just watching other comics.
I was just going to say,
learning from them.
I was just going to say, you don't take the material, but you could learn from the style of presentation, the type of material.
Also, like they made a joke that's very similar to yours, so it's. I like to watch the whole show, and also sometimes you go crazy backstage waiting for your spot. You're looking about your act. So sometimes I like to do that, all that stuff before the show, prepare 100%, and then just watch the show until about a little bit before you go on when you go backstage, because to really enjoy the show and then see what's working, what's not working, and it's like being in the crowd and going on stage. I think you get like an inside vibe a little bit from being in the crowd. I know comics hate to go in the crowd, but I like to sit in the back and watch the show if I have that luxury,
Well, I think from a producer's point of view, I would recommend that to anybody because it gives you a feel of the room because audiences are different. I mentioned it earlier. There's a huge difference between a Friday night late show and a Wednesday evening. I mean, every audience has its own personality.
Oh.
And if you go up on stage totally cold, you're just making your job harder.
Yeah, and then every slot is different. The audience is in a different mood almost for every, as the night goes on, they can get better, they can get worse. So there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of factors that go into mixing a perfect comedy night martini. It's not just good audience, good comedy. There's the lights, there's the sound. Like you said, the ceilings were low and good. The stage it was the total focus of that room was the stage. There was no other. There wasn't any signs, lighted signs. Sometimes you see these stages, they got lighted signs on the side. It's like the comic has to compete with all this stuff,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've noticed that at other clubs. I never realized that it could be that big a distraction, but that makes sense. But I also agree that connecting with the audience by having some idea of what you're going to do before you go up. And I think it's just smart to watch the other acts, as you pointed out. You want to make sure that you're not stepping on each other's material accidentally.
Yeah, and you have, if you have, it's probably obvious, but if you have what you're going to say first down a couple, because some people, I don't know what I'm going to say. Well, I don't know what to do, but it's like that makes your job easier, And if that doesn't work, have it, shift around a little bit or whatever, But definitely watching the show is a good, because like I said, every crowd is different. They all have a personality. Some crowds you fall in love with, you get these crushes on the whole crowd, where you just love the whole crowd, and some you just have a bad relationship with. But you got to change your job to change it,
Right, and sometimes that's on the comic. But I mean, I as a producer understood there were times that it was just the club, it was just the audience. There was a something. Let's say there's a bachelorette party or some other celebration that might have been taking the focus away from the stage. I think one of the interesting and most difficult parts of being a stand-up comic, and one of the reasons I so value people like you that have this kind of talent, is it's not like you're a carpenter and you go and you know that this board is nailed to that board and you cut it to this length and it's all pretty laid out for you. With stand-up comedy, each and every time you go on stage, doesn't matter if it's the same club or the same acts in front of you or not, every time is a different feeling, is a different interaction, and comics have to be talented enough to react and adjust to that. I mean, I'm always so impressed with your talent that way.
That's just reading the room, I guess, and you, it's funny because like my wife says, oh, you're like, you could see it you notice it when people are bad at, even in conversations, when someone says blah, 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 and they're like, oh, I don't know that guy. And they still keep talking about, I think it's just reading your audience, whether it's one-on-one or you get good at like, oh, you need feedback as a comic. So you don't get it, you're like, what's going on here? I gotta do something else,
Right. And it's also being able to react like it's, in fact, I was just, did an interview with Tom Dreesen, and he was saying that it's a conversation, not a presentation. You have to be able to connect and react to the audience like it's almost like it's one other person.
Tom Dreesen, did he have any good Frank Sinatra stories?
Oh yeah, that was an amazing interview. But
I'll listen to that one. Definitely.
You'll listen to that one. Okay.
Yeah, I can't listen to my own. My voice is too high and shrill. I can't hear it.
Well, I know
how you do it.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to sidetrack us, but it is true what he was trying to make, the point that each and every audience is different. And if you have a conversation with them and introduce yourself comedically or however, and you have to build that up, but every night, every show is so different. It's amazing. And we've talked probably too much on this, but so you worked the club Laughs Unlimited for many years, as I've already pointed out, one of my personal favorites, one of the staff favorites. My wife would put you in the top 5 in the history of the club, which is a huge honor because she's a smart person. But
well, your staff was always so wonderful to me because I made fun of you on stage, and that's why they liked me.
Oh, well, that was it. Well, that's one way to endear yourself. Go ahead and pick on the boss.
But also, you had a pretty good sense of humor about. A lot of club owners didn't have a good sense, but you took it pretty well. And that was the saving. That was one of your good traits is. You really would laugh it off, and you could give it back pretty good too.
Well, I will point that out to Jill and see if that was one of the reasons. But that is so funny. So after, I had the club in the 90s and into 2000, you've done a lot of successful things after that. I know you continued working clubs around the country. You started having regular appearances on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. How often did you get a chance to do that show?
I only did that once.
Only once? Well, you must have been a big hit because I hear about it all the time.
I did it once. Yeah, it went well. And then I did like Jimmy Kimmel 3 times.
Oh, okay.
So that was good. And then I did all the MTV and the comedy. I did all the Comedy Central ones for a while, the half hour, all those things,
Okay, so you got a share amount of TV exposure. Did you find that helped your career? Did it pay well? Was it just something that was a good experience?
I don't think it ever. I think it paid scale, so maybe $1,000 plus travel, but like you got to go to New York and whatnot. But it was it was a credit, and that was sort of it during the mid boom where all the credits helped. Now people now it's like how many Twitter followers you have, but then those
it's changed, yeah,
it's changed, but it's it's fine, it's just what it is. But that's at the time it was that those things were real helpful to get work, and also in San Francisco there was a radio show I did called the Alex Bennett Show, and that really helped me in San Francisco market get booked because I did good on that because I'd make fun of Alex Bennett.
Well, Alex, the Alex Bennett Show, for everybody listening in the podcast audience, was a huge show in the Bay Area. And what was great about Alex is that he loved having stand-up comics on the show. And if you were a regular on the Alex Bennett Show, that really made you in the Bay Area.
Yeah, that was my first thing where I started, like, this really helped where, you got to bump up, like, okay, now all the city clubs are working me because of this Alex Bennett show, like I was on the Alex Bennett show. So,
but you also go from, maybe a feature to a headliner because you're starting to get credits, right? Or more money as a headliner.
That was still just opening. That was early on. That was like year 2. After Conan, then I was still house MC at Conan. Then he bumped me up to middle after Conan. He had to bump me up after I was still opening. I got Conan kind of early,
And who was this? The booker?
Tom Sawyer at Cobb's.
Oh, okay. You didn't reference that because I think I moved you up pretty quick.
Yeah, you were very great to me. But I and again, the clubs were great. They were, I thought some of the San Francisco clubs were really good proving grounds. So your crowds at the time, and I think, like, we talk about these rowdy bachelorettes, and everybody had them, but I think they were way better then than they are now. Now it just seems like once a week there's an issue with the crowd or someone complains. It just seemed they're on their phones a lot. I just remember pretty good crowds. And yeah, I did well. I think I did some crowd work. It wasn't your favorite, but like it went over well. And then I mixed. It always was the crowd was so perfect for crowd work because they were, like you said, stepped up so you could see everybody, and they were right there at your feet. So I would have good weeks. So you did, yeah. It was so you bumped me up. I think, yeah, you bumped me up before the city clubs did even, yeah.
Well, I think that it is true that compared to the Bay Area and even Los Angeles, that the audiences in Sacramento were a little bit more, mid-America, middle class, kind of your average Joes. But
they love to laugh, though. I tell you that they really were great crowds. Some of the best crowds in my history. I think of those early laughs.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that they are very appreciative of the art form, and you mentioned earlier that I might have you up 4 times a year. Well, I would do that on purpose because I wanted certain entertainers. I didn't do that with everybody, but I wanted certain entertainers to build a connection with my audience so that people would, oh man, I've seen that guy. We got to go, and they bring their friends and their family. If you brought back somebody enough, the audience remembered, and it helped build the reputation of the entertainer, which helped build the reputation of the club. That was my theory.
And that was something that kind of made you stuck a pull up your butt to write more, because you're like, oh, I was just there 4 months ago, 5 months ago. I gotta have at least this much different jokes, because it's, sometimes you get the same. Some of the people would like you and like, let us know when you come back. So you let them know. You get some of the same people back.
So it added a little pressure to write some new material, I think.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I have to keep writing because I got to get a new 30 minutes for SAC. I got to get a new whatever amount of minutes to my act.
Well,
I don't want to just do the same stuff.
And Tony, as a producer, I appreciated that you tried to always grow and up and change your act. But there were some people, Denny Johnston, that in the history of his stage act never changed a word.
And some people, but some people like that. It's just a different philosophy,
Yeah, it's a whole different style. No, it worked for him. I mean, he's still doing that.
Yeah, and he wrote it like in one night, right? Isn't that the legend? He wrote it in a night.
Well, that's the legend. I don't know. I think he worked on a little more than that, but everybody and their brother tried to give him suggestions for callbacks or taglines or punch up something, and he'd always be very gracious and say thank you, and then he would never change a word. It was hilarious.
Right, I'm sure he got so comfortable, and like you said, I never worked with him, but I saw it, and it always worked. I don't know about now with the Gay Marine. I don't know if that's still a thing. I remember that was a real standout, but like, it worked. It worked. So if something's worked, you don't want to change it up. I get his thinking behind it.
Right. Well, you were talking about your success in the clubs, but you did convert kind of into more of a comedy writer. At what point did you start focusing on that? What was the driving force for everybody in the audience? Tony is one of the main actors and writers for the very famous Marijuana Monologues, which was a huge hit around the country. Was that the transition, or did you start before that?
I started before that. That kind of came on a side door thing where I was in the Bay Area. I'd come up to the Bay Area a lot because I was housed in Cubs, and there was all this CD-ROM writing, where they CD-ROM video games.
Right.
And I got a gig writing these CD-ROMs in Marin with Deb Durst and Vernon Chapman, who's, huge now. He's like the biggest comedy writer in the world. Matt Weinhold. And we would go up to Marin and work on this video game. And I think we were getting like $300 a day. And I was like, that's like a week, some weeks of my work. Not, I was a little bit more than that, but like I was making that day. So I'm like, this writing is a pretty good deal,
No, it can pay well if you get the right gig. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I did another one here in LA. There's another company I got recommended to do this other video game. And it was with the other guys were TV writers I didn't know. And also Patton Oswalt and Brian Posehn were writing on it too. And Patton had written some things. He's like, you should look into writing if you want to. You don't have to travel and you're good at it. So my manager, Dave Rath, hooked me up with this writer who was a writer's assistant on King of the Hill. And we just started working together. So yeah, we wrote for a couple years on TV shows,
Oh, I didn't know that you wrote for sitcoms and TV.
Yeah, nothing that you would know, but like, yeah, we worked for Comedy Central shows. We worked for an NBC show. And then as a performer side thing, Arj and I just had the pun of the marijuana. So we were developing that as just a fun thing. We never thought it was going to blow up. It was just like, hey, let's do this crazy show. We brought Doug in because he was a stoner and he was a good joke writer, Doug Benson. And so then, and that was not on my horizon at all. And that took us, to New York and blah, blah, blah. And
well, before we jump forward to that, how did you enjoy focusing on writing, and was it financially, as the guy promised, less travel, more money than doing road gigs?
Yeah. I mean, it was an investment for a year writing the spec scripts because we were both slow, my partner and I, or a little bit less than that. And then we got recommended by my friend Alex Reed, who was a Bay Area comic. Now he's a big director and writer. We got, for his agent. So they looked at they repped us. So we got staff pretty quickly. So we were lucky, but it was a lot of work. I liked the money, but the money is great. And I liked writing a joke in the room. And in a comedy room, there's days where you kind of crack a story, and those are frustrating because you're trying to solve this puzzle. And then there's days where you're just kind of adding the jokes, and those were my favorite. Obviously, if you make a bunch of people laugh, it was almost like doing a club. You had a lot of you had to get some fun days, but it wasn't nearly as fun as stand up because it could just be so grueling. And stand up, you're used to going to different cities, and you're traveling. Here, you're in the same room, sometimes, 14 hours a day, and it's all you think about is how important you got to come in with new ideas in the morning and blah blah blah. It was a really they're all demanding jobs. At least mine were. They were very. I'm not that smart and a slow writer, so I'd be like up late thinking about what I had to do for tomorrow to keep up with everybody. So it was just the opposite thing of stand up, which is you could say whatever you want. You have all this freedom and stuff, and then here you work with 14 other people, and you have this whole story part. You have emotions you're dealing with when you don't really need. It's not as necessary as jokes, but it's sometimes it is. And then so it's just such a different. It's almost exact opposite in some ways. The only good thing though is, and I worked. My first show was with Dana Gould, the great Simpsons writer. This was before the Simpsons, great comic. He was like, the good thing about this is you write a joke, 3 million people are going to hear it. You write a joke for your stand-up, how many people are going to hear it even the course of your whole career. So that is interesting. It's like when you got jokes on the air, like, oh, at the time, this is when network was still bigger, millions of people would hear your joke. And that was rewarding too,
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I've talked to a few other comics that became writers, and in every case, what they didn't like, it was long, grueling hours, and there was always a deadline. But they also said the trade-off was they were making not necessarily a lot better money, but they were making decent money, and they didn't have to leave home. They could go home to their own bed every night.
Yeah, a lot of these people they're at the age where they're getting families and stuff. You don't want to be in, Nebraska when you got a little baby at home. So this is a way to be funny and stay at home. Now there's so many different avenues to, there's podcasts and webcam, all this. It's changed so much. So, and network TV is not even as big a deal now at all.
Right. And actually, one of the people I'm thinking of, you know very well, Karen Anderson, who went from stand-up comedy to comedy writer, was saying exactly that she wanted to be home. She was having kids and building a family. And even though there was long, grueling hours and the trade-off for stability and decent income made it worthwhile. But again, I didn't put you in the same bucket as somebody like Karen Anderson or Ed Solomon that all they did was write. You were still performing and writing, right?
Yeah, and Karen sort of stopped that. She came back and did a show with me and Arj a couple years ago when the Punchline was maybe getting closed. And that was just for old time's sake. She sort of didn't want to do it as much. She does it once in a while. She'll go to the Ice House, like the writers of Ellen or something. She'll do something like that. But like, she sort of didn't have it. I've always liked doing it. I always think to be the bottom line, it's still really fun to go up. I like to do it.
There's something about stand-up comedy and getting that reaction from a room full of strangers that's very compelling and somewhat addictive.
I mean, you liked it. You could tell you always were you got up on stage and you were smiling and beaming. You enjoyed that too, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, and it's been pointed out I sometimes was up there too long. But
sometimes
I love
your
the stage. Your
definition of sometimes is every time, then yes, sometimes.
Well, how did this writing for TV and video games and stuff transition to the Marijuana Logs? Because you and Arj had huge success with that. Maybe tell the audience a little bit about that process.
Well, he just said the pun, because the Vagina Monologues was a big play at the time, a reading. And then we were in Washington doing some shows together, and he said something about a marijuana log. I'm like, hey, that's a great idea. Marijuana log. You could do a parody of the Vagina Monologues. And we're like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, because we both had some pot jokes in our act. So all we do is have to sort of watch the Vagina Monologues and get the template of the form of it, and then just write a bunch of stuff. And we're, he's a good joke writer, and he wrote probably the most creative stuff. He has this weird stuff about Bach, and that's crazy. Doug's a good joke writer, and I'm adaptable. So, and we have these personalities, and not just pot jokes at the end. It's like 3 different personalities up there. And the best thing about it is it was the Vagina Monologues read from it's a reading, so they read from a script. So we couldn't forget it. It's right in front of us. We couldn't. It was foolproof. We still messed up quite a bit, but
or you improv'd.
Yeah, we had a good excuse, like, we're stoned. That's what, and the audience was very forgiving of it. They're often in a similar disposition as we were. So it was
I just got that.
Yeah.
Well, I did not, obviously I got the connection to the Vagina Monologue and the Marijuana Logs. I did not realize that you actually borrowed the template and were trying to almost do a mockumentary.
We had to go watch that show. Arj and I went to Beverly Hills and watched 3 actresses. Terry Hatcher, I forget who were the maybe Hot Lips, Loretta Swift, maybe, I don't know. It was like 3, Sally Kellerman, one of these 3, actresses in their 50s doing this the Vagina Monologue, so we could know how to do it. And some people who'd seen both thought we did a really good job. It was very, very slim crossover audience, but we did get them once in a while. So we, they were barefoot, we wore socks. We thought that was more stonery. They were in all black, we were in all black. They had 3 stools similar. We tried to, and it was very solemn opening, because we're trying to, like, a faux serious moment, classical music,
For a marijuana audience, I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, it was getting laughs. We come out to this classical music, people were laughing already, and then I don't know if you know Bruce Smith. He was Andy Kindler's manager. When I know you were an early Andy Kindler fan.
Yes.
Bruce Smith is Doug's manager, so we did this early workshop that they call the HBO Workspace, where maybe had about 25 minutes of show as we were adding to it. You could workshop it, and he taped it and he sent it to Montreal. So we got the Montreal
Comedy Festival.
We got that 6 months. So we had to write an hour show, but we got the show before we finished the show. We got the gig before we finished the show. We had to write a lot more of it for Montreal. So that made it faster. But then we got to Montreal and it was a hit there. So a lot of clubs saw it. So then we toured with it and we got TV shows and stuff, did Bill Maher show and we did Jimmy Kimmel. So that it was like we got to be an instant headliner,
Well, now this was before Arj was a huge hit in Australia, right? Or was this after?
He was already pretty big in Australia. Like, he was big enough. Once this got going, he just automatically got us into the festivals. We were shocked how big he had posters all over. I mean, he's not like he is now. And now he's like the second or third highest paid comic there. But then he was he was well known, but not like he is now. But like, yeah, he was the draw when we went there in like 2003 or something.
Wow. Well, I did not realize that that's how it got started. It's a famous thing. Sadly, I never got a chance to see it, mostly because I was already working nights. But
I don't remember it either. So we're in the same boat.
Well, when you're actually participating in the marijuana log, you have you have an obligation to partake of what you're talking about. So I'm assuming there was some interaction between you and Arj. And what's Doug's last name? I think I know who it is, but
Doug Benson.
Doug Benson. Okay. No, that's not who I was
thinking. And we got,
of.
That interaction got us into trouble because after New York, we toured theaters with Tommy Chong after his prison release. And people would throw marijuana on stage to the point where he had to stop doing the show because he was around marijuana too much.
Right. It's against his probation, right?
We did Vancouver, his hometown, and people threw so much pot on stage that he called our producers and said, I have to back out of this. And we had to go, it was so dumb. We had to stretch SUV and we went through the border and the dogs were going crazy and they couldn't find anything. But later I did have a big, huge thing in my backpack that I forgot about. And he's just like, if I got caught, I'd go back to jail. So it's kind of my fault. But he was just around it too much.
That's a great story, though. I mean, that's one of those things that the regular audience, because even I, with all the 20 plus years of having a club, I've never had the audience throw drugs up on stage. And I think that that's a great story. And I totally understand Tommy Chong being careful. Now, I had a chance to work with him twice at my club, and he was off stage, very genuine, easy to talk to, and drugs were not part of it. Of course, I never liked having drugs in the club, but still, I could totally see his apprehension to having too much marijuana around because it would break his probation. He could end up back in jail. That's kind of scary and funny.
Yeah. So, so the interaction was actually a detriment to the show.
How long did you, Doug, and Arj Barker tour with that?
I don't know. We wrote it right. Like, I remember we were doing a show and that was right before 9/11. So it was 2000. It got going again 2002 to about 2000. We were off Broadway for between 2004 and 5 or 3 and 4. I don't know. It's a blur. We did Montreal. We went to Australia. Then we did New York. I think 2004 and 5. And then we had some fill-in people. Once Arj left, then Doug left, and I did it with some other people, Rob Cantrell and a bunch of other guys. And
well, you had amazing success with that, Tony, and not only writing it and acting in it, but I am assuming that financially it was rewarding for all three of you.
Oh yeah. I remember having, Arj and I were because they were also the experience of they were paying for our New York apartments too, so we got a chance to live in New York for free and do this thing. And, it was just like you said, it was just like a writing job where we didn't have to travel and we were getting headliner money every week, and all this book deals and video deals, we had books and record and stuff. So it was for a while. It was great, and it was something we loved to do. So it was worked out great,
Well, congratulations on your success on that, Tony.
Yeah, and it was like I've worked hard on so many things that nothing come of it, and that was just the fluke that took off. So you never know,
Well, you're talking to an entrepreneur who started over 12 companies, and several of them failed miserably. But luckily, with the comedy clubs and a few other, I did quite well. So that's just part of life.
You still have the submarine?
No, that was one of my big downfalls. For the audience, I owned a submarine in Monterey Bay for about a year and a half. Ended up selling it to the Wrigley family. It's still running in Catalina, but I took a huge financial bath in that. But I could say I owned a submarine.
I'm going to tell you, Scott, that was so impressive when you because you're a famous nickel and dimer, and like, this MF bought a
submarine. Wait a minute, famous nickel and dimer.
You would always I'd have to show you said 650, not 6, and you'd be good about it. You're like, all right, But I just remember talking to Lori Kilmartin. I'm like, this MF bought a submarine, and he's trying to chinch me out of $20. No, it sounded like you're in James Bond world or something, buying a submarine,
That's so funny. I can't imagine. That must have seemed a little strange. But of course, as the producer, I wasn't thinking about one in connection to the other. But yes.
No, and we were saying it laughingly, we all love it.
Well, and I've been mocked openly about my amount of time on stage and how I was considered cheap as a club owner. However, I always treated everybody well, and everybody that was good got a lot of work out of it. Yeah,
and also you used a lot of women, I thought, pretty early. Like, you always had a good rotation of women, which, a lot of club owners had something against women, but you had women all the time on your shows, and I thought that was a nice thing. Work with a lot of great women at your club.
Yeah, we really lucked out, but I was open to all that. Well, and also like other club owners, and this, we're getting away from the topic, which is you, Tony, but I also like...
Oh, you didn't hear?
Showcasing other art forms, juggling, ventriloquist, magic. I mean, I tried to have them all. I even had a professional tap dancer once.
Yeah, I'm not going to say his name, but I was a very odd guy. The only odd week was with this odd guy, and I'll just say he worked with birds, so you know who I'm talking about. But that guy is real unusual off stage guy, in the condo.
I know exactly who you mean, and I didn't know that he was strange off stage.
Real odd, didn't like to talk about anything, just odd bird, no pun intended.
Well, you've had all kinds of success. We've kind of gotten you up to, let's say, 2008 or so. The last 10 years, what have you been doing to keep your creative juices going, Tony? Share with the audience. Anything we can plug?
No, I did a couple things. I was a correspondent on this HBO show I did a lot of little things. Now during the pandemic, I didn't do anything. I worked on my house, played guitar, a lot of guitar, learned some Led Zeppelin songs and some Jimi Hendrix. Didn't do much Zoom, and then I'm getting back into it now. July, I did a bunch of stand-up all over the country, opened the Punchline back up. I'll be in Sacramento if this airs before New Year's Eve, closing the Punchline Sacramento.
Oh, that's awesome. Maybe we come out and see you. That would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. And then some San Francisco shows and stuff, and then a bunch of stuff coming up.
You're back doing your first love, which is you're back out on the road.
Yeah, thank God my wife makes enough money I could go back on the road.
Yeah,
and lose money.
Well, I don't think you'll lose money on the road, but the point is that your basic start in comedy was as a stand-up, and even though you've had success with this the Marijuana Logs, which is like a play, and you've had success writing for TV and video games and all the stuff, all the experiences you've had, I think it's really cool that it all comes back down to getting on stage in front of a room of strangers. I think that there's something about stand-up comedy that just keeps bringing you back. I mean, it's being proved every day by Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno. They're all out working as much as they can.
Oh, yeah, and you really nailed it when you said being in the room, because I did some, the Zoom stuff is not the same as that tension of having people look you in the face and you're looking right at them, being in the same room and making these people laugh. That's the magic of it right there. You know, you can't. That's the thing you can't replace with being a writer on a sitcom, or is that moment, that little sparky moment you have with an audience where you make them laugh. You can't beat it.
Yeah, I was just talking to a mutual friend of ours, Steve Bruner, who has done a fair amount of the Zoom stuff. And I said, you know, stand-up is so about timing and interaction with an audience. And he goes, that's the hardest part, is that you have to pause, hoping they're laughing. And then you know, there's that delay and the lack of interaction. I mean, he had to do it to keep money coming in. But he is so happy to be back doing live stage work. I think that's really the way to go.
Oh yeah. Like I said, it's a different thing. And there's people in Zoom comedy who are real good at it, and that's just, I think it's just a slightly different nuanced skill. You know, I need that crowd for my timing and the pacing and I can't just like it's not the same thing for me. That's one of the parts of comedy that took me, is that in-room tension with another person. I call it tension, but it's just whatever it is, you know.
Right. It's that connection. Well, Tony, I appreciate your time today. We've had a chance to learn about you and your career. You've been very successful, and as I mentioned right in the start, and I'm going to repeat it now, one of my favorite acts to come through the club. Not only always terrific with the audiences, but very important to me as a club owner. You were great with the staff, and just thank you for all the laughs in comedy and just who you are and what you brought to Laughs Unlimited, man. Thank you.
And thank you for getting my start in comedy, man. I owe you a lot. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm glad that it turned out so well, and it was my honor to have you on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Tony, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. We'll keep an eye out for future work on your part. Ladies and gentlemen, he's still touring and still performing, so be sure to catch Tony Camin live on stage.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Tony Camin. I'm so appreciative of his taking the time to do the interview, but just like all my shows, I like to have a few minutes of material to tie it all in. So ladies and gentlemen, here's some live stand-up comedy by Tony Camin.
So my name's Tony. Hi. I'm from Mountain View, California. If you don't know Mountain View, California, that's where Google is. If you don't know what Google is, dang it. That joke kills in Seattle, I tell you. Not really, just the same. Anyway, so I was hanging out with my mom, borrowing some money, and in her town there, she still lives in Mountain View, and Google is testing out all these little self-driving cars, called Waymos, buzzing around town there, and they still have a human in there, taking down the data just in case for safety. And I'm crossing the El Camino Real. Okay, big street. Thanks. And one screams to a halt and fucking barely misses me. I'm like, what the fuck? And the human in the car goes, yeah, what the fuck, to the car. Now it's always like, what's the usefulness of self-driving cars? If I have to go, I might as well drive, right? If you can. And then I realized, oh yeah, road rage is going to be so awkwardly dissipated. Someone will catch me up, hey man, fuck that, fuck you. And I'll be like, I'll just sleep in the back. What, huh? Oh yeah, talk to the car. I'm. It's that man. The machine don't care. I don't know. I'm a China story. I don't know if this technology is crossing the line here. True story. In a couple months, they're going to be rolling out pizza delivery robots in Los Angeles. They're out here in Australia, and I'm like, no, that's a bad idea for LA. It's a little robot within his tummy is a little pizza warming area, and they stick the pizzas in there, they lock it, close it up. It gets to the house, you get an app or something, and But I feel bad for this robot already. It's LA. This poor thing, he's gonna get raped. He's gonna get tagged. Probably have to join a gang. Little gang member robot there. That might be cute for a bit. People are gonna take the pieces out, stick them like dead raccoons and stuff. Like, I just feel sorry for this little robot. He gets out of robot college, the bright eye in the future, these new technology. What's my assignment? Space, medicine. Well, I got your robot college grades here, and looks like dominoes. Fuck me. Come on, Roomba, let's get out of here. This is bullshit. Let's go watch Westworld. I don't get it either.
Well, you can see why Tony's one of our favorite acts. A very funny guy. It was really an honor to reconnect with him, have him on the Comedy Roundtable, and to do this interview. I hope you enjoyed the interview and his little bit of stand-up comedy. Hey, thanks for listening. Please tell your family and friends about our little podcast, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.